Imagine a tiny speck of evidence, so small that the human eye could never see it. A single trace, almost invisible, yet powerful enough to hide the secret of a monstrous crime. A secret that remained buried not for a few years, but for 61 long years. Through brutal winters, through ice storms, through decades of change, and through revolutions in technology, the evidence survived everything, even the passing of the killer himself. And yet, that tiny speck kept its secret, waiting patiently for the day someone would finally understand it. This is the story of that tiny piece of evidence and the truth it finally revealed. For 6 long decades, the murder of 12-year-old Mary Theresa Simpson haunted the quiet city of Elmira, New York. It was a tragedy that slowly turned into a ghost story, a case that faded into silence as the years passed. Files gathered dust, documents turned yellow, investigators came and investigators went, but the answers never came. For Mary's family, the pain never disappeared. Her older sister Linda carried the memory for a lifetime. She could never forget the moment she saw Mary lying in her casket. The shock, the grief, the unbearable silence of that moment. It haunted her so deeply that, as a child, she once tried to climb into the casket just to be with her little sister again. For the family, justice felt like something time had stolen forever, something that would never come back. But they were wrong, because the truth, the real truth, had been sitting there the entire time, hidden in plain sight, frozen in time, waiting for science to finally catch up with evil.
Welcome to Hidden Chronicle, where real mysteries come to life. Every case has a name, every name has a story, and every story deserves to be told. Here, we explore the world's most fascinating true crime stories, missing persons, solved cold cases, and investigations that still haunt us. Our mission? To uncover the truth, to honor the lives behind the headlines, and to make sure these stories are never forgotten. If you believe every mystery deserves to be remembered, you're in the right place. Subscribe to Hidden Chronicle and join us as we bring the lost stories back to light. Like if you love real mysteries, comment your thoughts. We read them all. Share to help these stories reach further. Thank you for being part of the Hidden Chronicle family, where the truth always finds a way home.
To understand the true magnitude of this breakthrough, we must travel back in time, back to a much simpler world, a quieter world. March 15th, 1964. It was a calm Sunday evening in the quiet city of Elmira. The air was crisp, the streets were peaceful, and nothing about that evening suggested the nightmare that was about to unfold. 12-year-old Mary Theresa Simpson was a shy, gentle, sweet-natured girl. That afternoon, she had been doing what children do best: playing, laughing, spending time with her cousins at her grandfather's home on Sierra Street. For Mary, it was just another ordinary day. But as the sun slowly began to sink below the horizon, everything changed. At around 6:30 p.m., Mary left her grandfather's house and began the short walk toward her own home. It was a route she knew well, a walk she had taken many times before. Witnesses later remembered seeing her at the corner of East Market and Harriet Streets. To the neighborhood, it was a completely normal sight, just a young girl walking home. No one realized they were witnessing the last moments Mary would ever be seen alive. When she didn't return home, her father began to worry. At first, it may have seemed like a simple delay. Maybe she had stopped to talk with a friend. Maybe she had taken a longer route home. But as the hours passed, that worry slowly turned into fear. By 10:30 p.m., her father did something no parent ever wants to do. He called the Elmira Police Department and reported his little girl missing. What followed was a desperate, frantic search. Police officers, neighbors, and volunteers all began looking for Mary. For 4 agonizing days, the entire community held its breath. Every phone call, every knock on the door brought a small spark of hope. Maybe she would be found safe. Maybe a miracle would happen. But on March 19th, that hope was shattered completely. A man hiking with his 2 young sons near Combs Hill Road in Southport stumbled upon something hidden deep in the woods. At first, it looked like nothing more than a pile of branches, heavy limbs, fallen leaves, clumps of dirt. But something about it didn't look natural, and when he looked closer, the horrifying truth emerged. Beneath that pile of debris, someone had hidden a body. 4 massive stones, one weighing more than 100 pounds, had been placed on top, as if someone was desperately trying to make sure the truth would never be found. But the concealment wasn't perfect. From beneath the pile, a small hand could be seen, and a single sneaker. It was Mary, her body frozen by the cold, still fully clothed. The autopsy later revealed the terrible truth. Mary had been sexually assaulted, and then she had been strangled. In a final act of cruelty, her mouth had been stuffed with dirt and small twigs. The killer believed he had buried his crime, buried his sin, but he was wrong, because even the darkest crimes leave something behind, a trace, a mistake, a piece of evidence that time cannot erase. And decades later, that tiny piece of evidence would finally speak. In 1964, the murder of a child was not just a crime. It was a catastrophe, a shockwave that spread through an entire community. The quiet town of Elmira suddenly found itself facing a nightmare no one was prepared for. Investigators launched a massive search. More than 50 men combed through the nearby woods, carefully searching every inch of ground. They collected anything that might hold the smallest clue. Mary's eyeglasses, a small fan club card that had been inside her pocket, even the tiny buttons from her blouse. Every item, no matter how small, was treated like a potential piece of the puzzle. Police questioned people across the community. Then they expanded their search even further. In total, more than 300 people were interviewed, some of them as far away as Arizona. The case captured the attention of the entire region. A local newspaper, along with a radio station, even offered a $1,000 reward. At that time, it was a fortune, a powerful incentive for anyone who might know something to come forward. 7 different suspects were even asked to take lie detector tests. Investigators were determined. They chased every lead. They followed every rumor. But no matter how hard they tried, the trail was already turning cold. The killer seemed to have vanished, almost as if he had simply disappeared into thin air. Despite the relentless work of a dedicated task force, the case slowly slipped into silence. Years passed, and the investigation, once so intense, grew cold. Eventually, the reward money that had been offered was donated to charity, in Mary's name. But this is where the story takes its first remarkable turn. Because even though the technology did not exist yet, the Elmira Police Department made a decision that would one day change everything. They saved everything. Every piece of evidence from the crime scene was carefully packaged, meticulously labeled, and placed into storage. Nothing was thrown away. Nothing was forgotten. As the years slowly turned into decades, those pieces of evidence remained there, sitting quietly in boxes. Later, they were moved into a freezer at police headquarters, waiting, preserved, almost like a frozen time capsule. Inside those boxes was a secret, a truth that the world simply wasn't ready to uncover yet, because the science required to reveal it had not been invented. Not yet. That secret would remain frozen in time for nearly 40 years. Then, in the early 2000s, something revolutionary arrived, a powerful new tool for investigators: forensic DNA analysis. For the first time in history, science could read the hidden genetic code left behind at crime scenes. In 2003, nearly 4 decades after the murder, investigators decided it was time. They reopened the evidence. That frozen time capsule was finally unlocked. Among the preserved items was Mary's skirt. It had been carefully stored all those years. When scientists examined it, they discovered exactly what investigators had hoped for: a tiny trace left behind by the attacker. A trace of semen. From that evidence, forensic experts were able to extract something extraordinary: a DNA profile. It was entered into Combined DNA Index System, better known as CODIS, a massive national database containing DNA profiles from convicted criminals across the United States. Investigators waited, holding their breath, hoping the system would produce a name. But the answer never came. No match. Years passed, technology improved, so in 2014, investigators tried again, this time with even more advanced DNA techniques. Once again, the database was searched, thousands of criminal profiles were checked, and once again, there was only silence. The database held the identities of countless offenders, but not the one they were looking for. It began to feel as if Mary's killer had vanished from history, a ghost, a nameless shadow lost somewhere in the past. And for a long time, it seemed that the mystery of who killed Mary Theresa Simpson might remain unsolved forever.
The case could have easily ended there. Another unsolved tragedy, slowly fading into history. A crime swallowed by time, with no answers and no justice. But for 2 investigators, walking away was never an option. Bill Goodwin, a determined sergeant with the Elmira Police Department, and Kenneth Jensen, a special agent with the FBI, refused to let the case disappear. For them, Mary's story wasn't finished, not yet. They believed there was still a chance, a very small chance, but a chance nonetheless. Both men had been studying a powerful new technique, a cutting-edge method that was beginning to change the world of criminal investigations. It was called investigative genetic genealogy. Unlike traditional DNA searches, this method did something different. Instead of looking for an exact match in a criminal database, it looked for family connections. Tiny fragments of DNA could be used to build a genetic family tree, and from that tree, investigators could slowly trace their way back to the killer. It was complicated, it was expensive, and it was far from guaranteed to work. But for this case, it was the last hope. In 2022, the investigators finally found a way forward. They secured funding from a nonprofit organization called Season of Justice. The grant gave them the opportunity to try the new technology. Carefully, they prepared the DNA evidence. It was incredibly small, just 0.4 nanograms. To put that into perspective, it was far less than a single drop of water. But inside that microscopic sample was a complete genetic story, a story that had been waiting nearly 60 years to be told. The precious sample was packaged carefully and sent to a specialized forensic laboratory in Texas, a company known for solving cases that many believed were impossible. The lab was called Othram. Their scientists had become famous for working with damaged or degraded DNA, evidence that other laboratories simply could not analyze. Everything was finally moving forward. The science was ready. The investigation had hope again. And then disaster struck. A massive winter storm swept across the United States. A historic ice storm slammed into Memphis. Airports shut down. Flights were canceled. Transportation across the region collapsed into chaos. The storm brought operations to a standstill at the largest FedEx shipping hub in the world. And somewhere inside that enormous facility, among millions of stranded packages, was the one box that mattered most. The package containing the DNA evidence, the only evidence that could finally solve the crime. It was sitting out on the tarmac, trapped in the freezing storm, and the dry ice inside the container, the ice meant to keep the sample preserved, was slowly evaporating. Time was running out. Later, Agent Jensen would describe that moment in simple words. "I was petrified," he said. "I thought my decision to ship it through FedEx was going to destroy our only chance to solve the case." For hours, investigators tried desperately to reach someone inside the shipping company, but communication lines were overwhelmed. No one could help, and every passing minute brought the evidence closer to being ruined. Finally, in a moment of desperation, Jensen reached out to his contacts inside the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Somewhere in Memphis, the FBI had a liaison officer stationed at the FedEx hub. A search operation began. Agents moved through the massive cargo facility, looking through piles of stranded shipments. It was like searching for a needle in an ocean of boxes, a frantic scavenger hunt inside a frozen maze of millions of packages. And then, against all odds, they found it. An FBI agent located the box just in time. The package was immediately secured and placed inside an FBI freezer until the storm finally passed. The evidence was safe. The DNA had survived. And now, after nearly 60 years, the science could finally begin. Inside the laboratory of Othram, scientists began their work. Years of scientific advancement, decades of research, were about to be used on a crime that had remained unsolved for nearly 60 years. Carefully, patiently, they began analyzing the tiny DNA sample. The amount of genetic material was incredibly small, but modern science could do something extraordinary. Piece by piece, the scientists reconstructed a complete DNA profile of the unknown killer. For the first time in history, the man who had hidden in the shadows finally had a genetic identity. But a DNA profile alone was not enough. To uncover the killer's name, investigators needed to trace his family connections. So the profile was handed over to the Forensic Genetic Genealogy Team at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Their job was to turn DNA into a family tree. The genetic data was uploaded into public genealogy databases, and then the slow, careful work began. Investigators started identifying distant relatives, third cousins, fourth cousins, branches of families that had spread across generations. Each connection added another branch to the growing family tree. Step by step, they followed those branches forward through time, from grandparents to children, from children to grandchildren. Generation by generation, the list of possible suspects became smaller, narrower, closer, until finally the trail pointed somewhere very specific, back to Elmira, and to a living man who was believed to be the son of the unknown suspect. Investigators approached him carefully. They explained the situation, and the man agreed to provide a voluntary DNA sample. When the results came back, The answer was stunning. The DNA taken from Mary's skirt was a perfect match to his biological father. After nearly 60 decades, the killer finally had a name: Alfred Raymond Murray Jr. The discovery was both shocking and deeply unsettling. Alfred Murray had lived an ordinary life. He was a Korean War veteran, a truck driver, a married man, a father of 3 children. To the outside world, he appeared completely normal. He had lived his entire life in the same quiet community of Elmira, and when he died, no one suspected a thing. Murray passed away from natural causes in March 2004, almost exactly 40 years after the murder of Mary Theresa Simpson. For decades, he had been living among them, walking the same streets, passing the same houses, blending perfectly into everyday life. And yet, no one ever knew the secret he carried. When investigators examined his past, they discovered something disturbing: a pattern, a history that revealed a much darker side. Records showed arrests involving children. One incident dated back to when Murray himself was only 17 years old. He had been accused of molesting 2 7-year-old girls. The signs had been there, the warning signals, but somehow he had managed to disappear into normal life, a predator hiding in plain sight. But there was one final step investigators needed to take. Because Alfred Murray was already dead, he had been buried in an Elmira cemetery for more than 2 decades. To prove the case beyond any doubt, investigators needed something definitive. They needed his DNA. The final confirmation would require a difficult decision. His body would have to be exhumed. Support came from National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The organization provided funding as well as expert assistance. And so, in November 2025, nearly 61 years after the crime, a team quietly arrived at the cemetery. 3 months before the public announcement, they carefully exhumed the remains of Alfred Murray. Samples were collected. The DNA testing began. When the results returned, there was no uncertainty, no possibility of doubt. The statistical probability was overwhelming. The odds that the DNA from Mary's skirt belonged to someone other than Alfred Murray were 1 in 320 billion. The evidence was absolute, irrefutable. After decades of mystery, the ghost of Mary's killer finally had a name, and that name was Alfred Raymond Murray Jr.
On February 10th, 2026, 61 long years after the death of Mary Theresa Simpson, the long wait was finally about to end. Inside a conference room at the Elmira Police Department, reporters slowly filled the seats. Cameras were set up. Microphones were placed on the table. There was a quiet tension in the air, because everyone knew this was not an ordinary press conference. This was about a case that had haunted the city of Elmira for more than 6 decades. Standing at the front of the room were the people who had carried the investigation through its final chapter. Police Chief Kristen Thorne, Sergeant Bill Goodwin, and the District Attorney. Behind them sat a crowd that reflected the long history of the case. Reporters, retired detectives who had spent years of their careers searching for answers, and most importantly, members of Mary's surviving family, people who had spent a lifetime waiting for this moment. The room fell silent as the chief stepped forward. She looked out across the audience. Then she spoke. "Today," she announced slowly, "we are closing one of the oldest cold cases in the history of this city." A brief pause filled the room. Then she continued, "We have identified Alfred Raymond Murray Jr.,
as the man responsible for the murder of Mary Theresa Simpson. For a moment, the words seemed to hang in the air. The mystery that had lasted 61 years had finally been solved. The announcement spread quickly through the community. For many residents of Elmira, the news felt almost unbelievable. For decades, the case had been a painful question with no answer. But now, the truth had finally come to light. For Linda Galpin, the moment was deeply emotional. Linda was now 78 years old. She had lived most of her life carrying the memory of her younger sister. More than 6 decades had passed since that terrible day. Decades filled with questions, with grief, and with the painful uncertainty of never knowing who was responsible. Many times she had said she never believed she would see justice in her lifetime. The years had simply been too many. The case had seemed too old. But on that day, she discovered she had been wrong. Standing among the reporters and investigators, Linda spoke quietly. Her voice carried both sorrow and a sense of peace. "I'm just glad justice was finally done," she said softly. A lifetime of pain echoed in those simple words. Then she added something more. "I want to thank everyone who was involved." It was a moment filled with mixed emotions: relief, grief, and the quiet understanding that although justice had finally arrived, nothing could ever bring Mary back. But after 61 years, the truth had finally been spoken, and the long silence that surrounded Mary Theresa Simpson's murder had finally come to an end. The case of Mary Theresa Simpson is no longer just another cold case from the past. Today, it stands as a powerful landmark in the history of forensic science, a reminder that even the oldest mysteries can one day be solved. In fact, this investigation has become known as one of the oldest cases ever solved through DNA evidence. A crime that remained hidden for more than 60 years, finally brought to light by science. But the story of Mary Theresa Simpson is about more than just technology. It is a story about persistence, about hope, and about the relentless pursuit of truth. For decades, investigators refused to give up. Evidence was preserved, memories were protected, and the belief that justice was still possible never completely faded. This case teaches us something profound. Time may pass, years may turn into decades, but time itself does not erase responsibility. A crime does not disappear simply because it grows old, and a victim is never truly forgotten. For investigators and law enforcement, the lesson is especially powerful. Never throw anything away, not a single piece of evidence, because you never know when science will advance or when a new technology will finally unlock the secret hidden inside that silent proof. What may look meaningless today may one day become the most important clue in a case. But this story also carries a message for the rest of us, for ordinary people, for communities, for anyone who might know something about a crime that has never been solved. The lesson is simple, but it is powerful. If you are a victim of a crime, or if you hold information about something that happened long ago, do not stay silent. Speak up, come forward, because sometimes the smallest piece of information can become the missing key, the one detail that investigators have been searching for years. Never assume a case is too old. Never believe that justice has simply disappeared, because the story of a little girl named Mary Theresa Simpson proves something remarkable. Justice may move slowly, sometimes painfully slowly,
But for those who refuse to give up, the wheels of justice never truly stop turning. They turn year after year, decade after decade, until the truth finally finds its way into the light.